Right, time for the paper review. We're joined by barrister extraordinaire Andrew Eborn. Good morning to you. Everyone needs a lawyer.
I think they probably do, actually. And I love the idea of getting people to talk. I think this is wonderful, you're saying, about getting the elderly queue and the queue and the slow places and Weatherspoons and other places are available. But getting the idea of community back again is really, really good, isn't it?
I think so, and I feel very strongly about the way we treat elderly people in this country. You work all your life, and then you sort of go on the scrap heap of life in the way that you're perceived, and that's wrong.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you say. When people give up, the mortality rate goes through the roof, doesn't it?
100%.
I think growing old disgracefully. I went to see The Who, My Degeneration, looking at them at the O2.
Invited me,
I did, and they were brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Were they?
But making jokes
but they're
about
not young, are they?
They're 80s and late 70s.
They really are.
And it's fantastic. And the Stones are still going and everything else. We should celebrate that.
Of course
we should, but I had a conversation with a young person the other day, about 28, who thinks that older people shouldn't have been able to vote in the referendum.
Oh, I've heard that.
Because, you know...
Why? Because they didn't vote the way they wanted.
Because they're not going to live long enough. You know, where is our respect?
Scandalous, isn't it?
Where is our respect for what people have put in?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Right, we ought to do some papers.
And isn't it refreshing, actually? Today there's such a mixed bag of stories.
Yeah.
Having been dominated with one story
There was
forever.
one story all during
that
the
sort
week.
Of thing.
Yeah.
But let's start with actually some quite sad stories, really. Expose the eco-plot to paralyse the capital yet again. So what's happened on this one? A Daily Express reporter infiltrated our people at Just Stop Oil. And what's going to happen is going to be the worst day ever, is what they say, of action. They're planning to do, basically bring the whole of London to a standstill. The biggest week of action yet is what they call it.
And when is this?
Starting from tomorrow, from rush hour and things like that.
Not just one day?
No, they're going to go on for a whole week. And you've got all these sort of different protests, and as colourful as they are, they've been disrupting things. I always wonder...
I mean, like, they disrupted the first night of the Pride.
I know.
Yeah, they did, and they're going to do everything.
You see, and we'll talk about this later as well, because I just do not understand why they cannot let people enjoy events.
So it's quite interesting. The reason for doing that was because they feel that the BBC is not highlighting what they call a climate emergency enough. And yet I actually feel that the BBC...
is over-egging the pudding.
Is over-egging the pudding constantly, changing the colours of the heat map to make it look more scary. And yet apparently they're not doing enough.
But you have to wonder, don't you, and we've made this point beforehand, however good their cause may be, I've yet to find anybody who turns around and supports their actions. And I think if you have a look, and what's Suella Braverman has sort of turned around and say, they're going to enforce all these new laws about the latest laws, including 12 months prison sentence and so on and so forth, and unlimited fines for activists who lock themselves together. So all of these sort of new things, that's what you need to do. You need to work on them. The problem is, the more that we talk about it, the more exposure we're getting, and they're turning around and saying, look, we're doing it.
And I've heard that from a lot of people.
And the other problem is that if they do this to London, the point is going to come where something bad is going to happen.
So that's a really good point. So we've seen people dragging them off the roads. Now, the police are acting far swifter than, far more swiftly than they were before. But you're right. People will take the matters into their own hands.
Well, they do, and the people who take matters into their own hands become the heroes, don't they? You see on the cricket field somebody who tackles them, or they carry them off, or whatever, or they drag them out of things. They become the heroes.
Absolutely.
But you have to, with all these things, stay within the law, because what's happening is, unfortunately, various people will be prosecuted if there's assault and so on and so forth.
The bit I can't understand is that we are all talking about whether there is obviously climate change going on, how much is man-made is up for debate, but the point is we're already talking about it. What are they going to achieve by this?
They're just alienating people. And it's the point that we've had many debates on this very show with people from Just Stop Oil to give them a platform. And you say, look, what are you hoping to achieve? Because the public already understand the issue. All you're doing is alienating people from the cause. So it's actually having a backlash, and you're doing more damage to the cause than actually any good.
In a cost of living crisis where people can't afford to actually eat, or indeed as we go into winter, I can't believe where we are already in the year, but it will become increasingly a problem. This next story is a big story. It's the front page of the Times. It says inheritance tax could be axed in Tory bid for votes. For me, this is a significant moment.
This is our silver bullet, and we spoke about this a few weeks ago. We campaigned on this show for this to happen. What happens? Inheritance tax, if you own or earn over sort of $325,000 as an individual, then the rest of it gets taxed at 40%, if that's what happens. A bit of an exception if you've got your own house and you give it to your children, you get the extra $175,000. Two of you get together. together, it could be up to $1 million. The reality, however, you work all your life, you pay tax every single penny that you earn, and then when you die...
And you buy a house.
And that's the problem. People are asset rich and cash poor. So people say, well, it doesn't affect me, I don't earn these huge sums. Actually, look at how much your house is worth.
Well, funny enough, I was talking to Tom Clayton on the way in, TalkSport's reporter, and he was saying basically an average house anywhere in the country is about $325,000. So it was originally implemented for people with high earnings and high net value assets. And of course now everyone's pretty, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have been dragged into it.
The stats don't show that, actually.
I know they don't.
They don't.
Which is interesting, but is this the silver bullet? That for me is the key. No.
So listen, I think this is, I agree with this and I want it to happen. I think it should happen. But what I think is this, I think there are far more important things in the everyday people's lives that they want to see sorted out. And I think Labour will use this as a tool to say...
But the key, what they're saying is actually they were going to try and get a tax cut. If they get rid of this, it's actually cheaper than the tax cut.
And that's exactly the point. 2p, which is not 2p or not 2p on the tax is what they said. That would have cost 13.7 billion a year. Actually, abolishing inheritance tax would cost 7 billion. So it's actually cheaper to do. And if people look at their house, and it's not the only thing, you're right, Renée, it's not the only thing. You need to look at all sorts of things, look at the 5 points and all that sort of stuff. Lots of issues. I do think that this could be a really good silver bullet.
Well,
so we've campaigned, we can claim that as a victory.
And it was the front page of the Times that made me write that question. Is the game over for Rishi Sunak? Can they turn that around? Is this the silver bullet? That's the question.
I think it would help. It'd be interesting to hear the views.
Yeah,
It'd be fantastic.
let us know.
But everybody is affected, and it's not just the mega rich. I think that's the point.
Indeed. Let's move on. I mean, if life couldn't be more difficult... By the way, the weather's awful again, and of course I'm desperate to go on holiday, because some of us don't go away the whole time. But
some of us run our lives well.
Some of us are very busy. Strikes, more strikes
yet again,
at Gatwick.
Meltdown. This is what they're sort of saying, the headlines scream, that sort of stuff. Every time there's a holiday, there's these massive strikes. So, holiday crisis, strikes threaten to cripple Gatwick. What's happened? There's about 4,500 flights are scheduled to take off from the airport over the strike days, and that affects 840,000 passengers. And basically, it's the second walkout. It's going to hit this major sort of stuff. It's going to cause massive disruptions. What I quite like, and I always like a sort of matte cartoon who summarises it beautifully. You won't be able to see it necessarily. No. But what they've got there, it sort of says, OK, what I did last summer, and they've got little pupils sort of saying at the bottom, I refer the class to my essay last year on airport strikes. But what he did last summer, I stayed at home and did nothing. So all that sort of stuff.
What I love about those cartoons is they're to the point and they're pithy. And they to encapsulate something quite complex in a simple sentence is really tricky.
Oh, Matt is brilliant, and I think whilst other cartoonists are available, Matt does seem to sort of get those sort of moments.
I just think again we've come out of 3 years of misery where a lot of people didn't travel, were scared to travel, couldn't travel, and now we're just going to make their summer absolutely hideous when the weather is hideous too.
The weather is hideous since Withers Day, of course. Yes, so therefore
it will be hideous for however many
40
days of hideousness.
40 days. I'm definitely emigrating. But just in terms of this comes on the back, and I was talking to Simon Calder during the week, 1,800, I think it is, EasyJet flights cancelled already because they're deeply concerned that they couldn't run those flights. And Simon was saying, actually, this is the right decision because they'd rather they cancel them now than cancel them when you're on it. On top of that, you've got air traffic control strikes taking place all over Europe, so that's why you were delayed, I'm sure. Either your sector was late, or it was air traffic control, or a mixture of the two.
Well, I think there was a lesson to Renée, don't get the last flight of the day.
I always take the last flight of the day, only on principle, because you want to get as much out of the holiday as possible.
No.
I thought it might be cancelled at one point.
See, so the key... that would have been interesting. So the key is, allegedly, talking to Simon, always get the first flight.
The first flight out?
The reason for that is the aircraft is already in position.
I get that.
But the later you leave it in the day, because it does multiple sectors...
you've got to work out they're flying in from there to there.
And they run out of hours.
But you're cutting your holiday short as a result. Whereas this happens, you get travel insurance, you'll be put up in a hotel for an extra night on them.
Wouldn't be sitting here today.
I never want to disagree with the wonderful Simon Calder, but But on this one, I would always take the last flight for that reason. If you want to make sure you get home early, that's fine. Take the first one, because there are going to be flights afterwards. If you take the last one, you'll be put up in a hotel, and they'll look after you on that sort of basis.
Interestingly, I was reading this morning that this coincides with a railway strike as well. So you can't. So you can't even a week of it. So you can't even get to Gatwick.
And people on strike, they will always say, of course, we're causing disruption. Otherwise, you're not going to listen to us. This is what they say. We want to cause maximum disruption so that you understand our concerns.
I know a TV presenter who flew into Gatwick when there was a train strike, who couldn't get back into London.
No.
Was that you?
I've wiped it from my memory. I had to get a taxi.
How much did that cost?
A lot. But I had to, because I had to get here. But anyway, let's move on. Let's move on from that. So next story... I find this particularly interesting. Hollywood walkout.
Yeah.
I saw Matt Damon being interviewed yesterday about the strike.
So this is the first time in 60-plus years that both the actors and also the writers have gone out on strike together, and leading Hollywood stars have joined the writers on the picket lines. And what they're saying is about the new sort of business models, if you like, for the streaming services, and they're concerned about my pet subject, AI.
They are.
Because they are absolutely, as we've warned about for generations, basically the problem is that AI is going to replace or potentially replace lots of actors, where you can get their names and images and likenesses and so on and so forth, and their voice, and you can replicate it zillions of times. And what they're trying to... The biggest argument is about the money side of it. How do you make sure that on the streaming world, where revenues are really, really tight in terms of what happens, how do you make sure that's a fair distribution for what are called residuals? In other words, if it appeared on television, you get repeat fees and things like that.
So what I hadn't understood about this was apparently what they're trying to do is that they... So jobbing actors, I mentioned Matt Damon, but the majority of people are jobbing actors. I mean, so they get like $100 for doing a walk-on.
If they ever walk.
If they're lucky. And so what they're trying to do is to say, OK, you sign this contract, so you go and do that job. And they take pictures of you or whatever, and they computerise your image in perpetuity.
So next time, they don't need you, and eventually they would need almost no one, apart from obviously the big stars, maybe. And this, again, is how, I'm sorry, Andrew, AI is destroying people's lives. Well, we won't
Doesn't it just need
humans.
regulating?
No, well, there are two things to it. It is absolutely... AI is a fantastic tool, but what you need to do is look at it like Grimes,
you ought to have pom-poms for AI.
But I'll tell you what, it's understanding the technology. This is what I do. I'm talking with the Royal Television Society, doing a special podcast on it. We're getting the great and good of the industry, bring them together, we'll get you a solution. The reality is that AI is incredibly powerful. It can replicate your image, so you can appear in people's homes without having to leave your wonderful airport lounge or whatever, and you can make sure you can appear. What we need to look at is the revenue streams and how that's divvied up in a fair way.
I agree.
So don't stop the technology, but make sure what they're talking about here, they highlighted the case. They say walk-on actors will get basically 1 day's pay, and then they give their image rights forever.
I mean, that's appalling.
That is wrong, and you absolutely have to do
that. Really is appalling.
That is appalling. So everybody talk about that as we do. I work with equity, as you know. I was a vice chair of Vice.
You're very well.
I thank you. Exactly that sort of thing. But what they did, they said, look, AI is going to steal the show. Don't let AI steal the show. You will work out a licensing mechanism. And I spoke about Bruce Willis, who, because of his condition, can no longer act, but he can earn money because he's licensed his face and image to do that sort of stuff.
That's all well and good, and I get that. But then what do these people do? Do they just sit on their sofa eating for the rest of their lives? You know, being unhealthy, being mentally destroyed. You know, people need to work.
I mean, so this is really interesting, and it just reminds me of ABBA Voyage, which obviously we went to see together. And again, these were the avatars. These have been digitally created. We went to see it. You can't tell it's not there.
You can't
tell.
And you can resurrect, just as you do with digital resurrections of artists. You could have Elvis singing with Pavarotti, singing with ABBA, and you can combine it with live performances. The possibilities are tremendous. Giving people more time, and when they said the same thing, any technology, they say, well, what are people going to do? Most actors actually don't work at all. They sit at home feeling terribly dejected,
it's a
below
shocking
the pay. And Matt Damon was saying, hang on, you can't even get healthcare if you don't get a certain level of income.
That's right.
And the residuals take you above that, so you take those away, people don't get healthcare in the States. So we need to look at the industry. This is actually a brilliant opportunity for people to license their rights, to make sure that you can turn around, but do it properly.
Well,
do it in a fair and
if I remember correctly, the developer of ChatGPT actually stood down, didn't he? And he said that actually now we need to regulate. And maybe this is the watershed moment to say, actually, stop. it's now progressing so quickly that we need to put in really, really rigorous frameworks around it.
Yeah, I would never say stop. What I would say is rather like...
Pause.
No, I wouldn't even pause. What I would do is understand what technology can do and make sure that two things...
But we know legislation takes so long.
It does, but you can regulate it in terms of... If everybody's talking about it and say, look, we've got to regulate this, it's all about rights. I'm a copyright lawyer, this is what we do. We look at a bundle of rights and making sure that people are treated fairly.
I don't think people are looking at what's going to happen. We're not just actors. Whole swathes of people, from delivery people who don't need to drive cars anymore, through to checkout staff that we've already seen, warehouse staff that are not needed because...
But surely, when those jobs go, don't we reinvent and find new jobs?
Yes.
I mean,
that's always happened.
The evidence for that is not there.
But when the factories closed, for example, people retrained, they went into different careers.
Yeah, but that was an entirely different situation. There are not going to be enough jobs programming and running AI.
Well, so then there's a bigger question.
People.
Should we all be working?
Well, that's the other thing, because you're going to get people's leisure time. The trouble is, what do people do? And you have to make sure, because people need a purpose in life. And
that is true.
And the trouble is, if they sit at home, they will die. And it's mortality rates, it's giving up. It's talking about...
And there are some good figures on this, aren't there? Yeah. The minute you stop working, your mortality goes up.
Yeah.
But interesting, one of the biggest tech entrepreneurs, a billionaire, was a chap who did the analogue version for feeding the AI, because they needed to double-check the roads and so on and so forth. It was a young Chinese chap who was a billionaire.
I saw that.
I saw that fantastic article. But basically what he did, he employed hundreds of thousands of people to verify the information that goes into these wonderful machines to churn that out. So that's how that sort of works as well. There will be jobs in the same way as when the internet came along, you know, that people worked out different ways of doing things. When the printing press came along, you work out that sort of stuff. People will have more leisure time.
This is going towards universal basic income. Because that's what's going to be needed, because people won't have jobs,
and
not all
control.
of them. And control. I'm sorry. That's what all this is heading towards. That's why governments are letting it happen, and that's why people just are a bit lost in all of this. And that's the big fear, and people need to wake up and see what's happening. Their jobs are going, they'll be controlled by universal basic income, digital currency, and everything else that goes with it.
Well, you're absolutely right. 300 million jobs is what Goldman Sachs said. You have to understand what the technology does, but there are threats and opportunities, and I think you need to understand both. Don't halt it, but make sure that we understand. And there's two sides to it. One is the input, which is getting all that machinery in and data into the machine, which is copyright issues and so on and so forth. And the other is the output. What happens as a result of those sort of things? And there are things such as hallucinations that need to be dealt with. There are things such as prejudice that needs to be dealt with these machines and so on and so forth.
And then your final story, which we haven't got time for now, but very quickly, what's the headline?
Heatwave blow torch Britain. Well, there you go. It's fantastic stuff. And it's at 49 degrees.
Take me there.
I tell you, what do I give? There's 120 in old money.
Well, it's funny, actually. Peter's just messaged in saying, great show as always, thank you very much. Heat waves in Europe. Have people forgotten that hot European countries have or had siestas for a reason? And that sort of feeds into the bigger narrative of, isn't it always hot in Europe in the summer?
Also, by the way, they are no longer including the UK's temperatures in the average European temperatures.
Is that right?
They call it EU temperature average.
So all goes back to Brexit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Lovely to see you both. Fantastic.
Lovely to see you as well. Thank you very much. Indeed. Right, time for a break. After the break, we'll have all the latest sporting headlines with Tom Clayton. This is Talk TV.